Each year, worldwide, over 250,000 pedestrians are killed in traffic. Millions of pedestrians are maimed or injured. Join us for the next half hour as we look for solutions on Perils for Pedestrians. On this episode, we talk with the director of the Urban Studies program at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. Then, we meet a resident of North Vancouver who donated a sidewalk. Finally, we talk with an urban planner about transportation choices in Vancouver. Stay tuned.
We're in Vancouver, British Columbia, talking with Anthony Pearl, who's director of the Urban Studies program at Simon Fraser University. What is the Urban Studies program?
Well, it's an interdisciplinary program that tries to figure out why cities work and how to make them work better. And we have 80 master's level students who are working on those questions from many different perspectives, including transportation, but housing, land use, social and economic development.
What are some of the major trends coming up in the next decade or two that are going to have a big impact on how we do our cities?
Well, we're reaching the end of cheap energy, and that's going to be a major driver. Our cities have grown outward rather than upward for the most part. Vancouver's a bit of an exception. Because energy was cheap and movement was cheap and materials to do that were also cheap. So in our transition for climate and energy futures, we're going to need to find more efficient ways of doing things. And cities, when they are dense, compact, and walkable, are among the most efficient way to have humans live and work and play together.
What's Vancouver done right that might give it a little edge going into the future with these changes coming up?
Well, to begin with, we're starting from a position of strength because Vancouver didn't do some of the wrong things that set lots of cities in a deficit position regarding livability and sustainability. The first thing that we didn't do wrong was build an urban expressway system through the city like Seattle and even Portland and San Francisco did. It's taken Portland and San Francisco decades to just start reclaiming some of the space that was messed up by putting in urban highways, and we didn't have that. So this downtown was always livable from day one, and it's become more livable as developers have come in and seen the potential with the natural environment and the livable street grid that allows people to live, work, and play within walking distance. So we've had 1,100 buildings since 1986 built in the downtown that are over 20 stories high. Now, New York and Chicago had those kinds of numbers back in the 1920s, but in the late 20th century, there was no city in North America that was doing what we did, which was building complex, well-designed, dense developments that had work and residential space and commercial space. And as a result, one of the things that Vancouver is unique in North America right now is that the human population is growing faster than the car population. That means that people are moving here with fewer cars, maybe one car per household instead of one car per person, or like myself and my wife, maybe we don't have a car at all, so that we just use our feet for most of our daily transportation.
So how important are pedestrians and walking to a city like Vancouver, or the cities of the future as they become more like Vancouver?
Well, pedestrian transportation is the lowest carbon mode of mobility, and we're going to have to start figuring out how to live more sustainably, and that means covering less distance with our own power, or at least covering less distance with lots of carbon emissions that are bad for the climate and expensive and unsustainable from an energy point of view. So it's quite feasible in Vancouver to live days, weeks at a time without needing a motor vehicle for personal transportation. Of course, we need a good freight logistics system and deliveries to make all that work. But when we don't have the streets clogged with gridlock from single-occupant passenger cars, we actually have more efficient deliveries as well that come from that, and more space for people to enjoy the urban design and and the natural environment when it's not raining anyway. So we have a virtuous cycle, if you will, of having places that are built for people first and then other types of vehicles. And that attracts more people, more development, more resources, and I think other cities will get on this virtuous cycle, especially as the cost of energy keeps going up in both money and security terms as well.
You get out into the suburban fringe of the Vancouver area, you can find some of those highways that they kept out of the city.
Yes.
What sort of problems are you going to be seeing in the suburbs of Vancouver when energy becomes scarce and expensive, and how can you address those? I mean,
those are big challenges. Someone described Canadian cities. They were speaking of Toronto, but I think it also applies to Vancouver and Montreal to some extent, as Vienna surrounded by Phoenix. There's a very sharp contrast when you leave the urban core to the suburban areas. The suburban areas are as sprawling in some cases as their U.S. counterparts and require as much automotive transportation as you would find in California or Arizona or Texas. And those are big challenges. What we're trying to do in this region, which I think is applicable certainly to many parts of the U.S., is to build rail rapid transit on a regional scale. Vancouver doesn't have streetcars or local rail, but we do have regional rail that mainly is set up to move people around the region. You wouldn't find it too convenient to get from one part of the downtown city or even midtown Vancouver to another. But you would find it convenient to get to the airport or to some of the regional town centers, as we call them. And the great thing about rail is that it's a place maker. When you build a train station, it just draws activity, development and commercial and even residential near it. So the best hope for many regions, and I would say the outskirts of the region in Vancouver as well, are to get these regional rail stations up and connected in so that people can get around and then live locally around those nodes in different places. So that's what we're hoping for, but it's a challenge because there has been sprawling development and we can't put the train stations everywhere. The whole point is to have them spaced a couple of miles apart, like BART or the Washington Metro system that's in use in Maryland. And of course, when those started, people said it'll never work. People always want the sort of sprawled lifestyle that was common. And it took a while in the U.S., but now you look at places. When I visited Washington for meetings of the Transportation Research Board, occasionally I get out into Maryland and you see Silver Spring and Bethesda and places like that. And there is an attraction development around those stations. It took a while, sometimes because the local governments weren't really ready to rezone and redevelop some of these places. But that's the best hope for regional development in a metropolitan scale in North America. And I think we're behind, actually, the Washington Metro. We don't have as many lines or as much of that regional development, but we're heading in that direction. And I think that the idea will be that people who live in those regional town centers will be able to walk to the metro, or here as they call it, the SkyTrain, to get longer distances without a car.
And when you talk to your students about how simple walking is the key to making cities run, are they quick to grasp that?
It takes a little bit of a mental adjustment. There's an old joke about how in China they don't call it Chinese food, they just call it food. And the same thing really applies to pedestrian transportation. I mean, pedestrian transportation is transportation in its most basic sense. And because we're all pedestrians almost all of our lives, although sometimes we lose that ability at the very end or the beginning, I guess, we take it for granted. So, but people who live on their feet notice it much more clearly. And many of our students, not all, but more than half of them live in the downtown area, in those 1,100 high-rise buildings, and they walk to school, so they know what they're conscious of being a pedestrian. They don't have to get it explained to them, but sometimes they help to explain it to the other students who are coming in from further out and aren't used to thinking about pedestrian transportation as a main mode, as an essential mode. It's really the first and last part of almost any trip that we take, and in the future it's going to be a bigger part of most trips that we take.
in North Vancouver, talking with Dave Perfett. What was here before this sidewalk we're standing on?
This was a very well-worn Desire line. It was well used. You could see the vegetation was all worn down, a very well-worn trail. I used to call it the trail on the east side of St. George's.
Why wasn't there a sidewalk here?
Well, it's because the zoning changed to condo development in this block, and what happened is all the surrounding properties developed condos, but this frontage property never developed. It's just a duplex, a rental duplex. And so in 2004, I got tired of complaining, and so I went forward to the city and offered to cost share a 50-50 for 50 meters of sidewalk. And so the city agreed to it, and so we cost shared on it. So that was my small scale of philanthropy, and I felt really good about doing that.
So some people donate a park bench, but you donated a sidewalk.
That's right, exactly. And the beauty of giving a sidewalk is that I can actually do a walk by and see it. I know a lot of people cut a check out to a cancer society or another not-for-profit organization, and you don't really know where the money goes when you give the check to them. They all do good work, and I'm not against those other not-for-profits, but one thing about giving the money to the city was that I can actually come by and see this sidewalk. It's a very hard asset, and I know where my money went.
Now, people used to donating to charities, but how does Canada treat it when you donate to the government?
Well, in Canada, the CRA, the Canadian Revenue Agency, views a gift to a Canadian municipality on par with a gift to a registered charity. So I was able to get a proper tax receipt from the Government of Canada for my income tax. And so the full cost of donating, I was able to recoup some of that without paying a lower tax rate.
So do you other than walking out yourself, do you see a lot of other people using your little piece of sidewalk?
Oh yes, yeah. Many people in the neighborhood here found out when I actually donated this. They were so thankful. And it was interesting because a lot of the politicians were always sort of caught off guard when they heard about that, because they're busy with their other issues or just unaware that there was people in the neighborhood that were actually quite aware of the missing section of sidewalk. But people just didn't really coalesce and bring it to a head politically, so it never really went anywhere. And I think lots of times there was minor random complaints that were diffuse, and the staff and the city didn't really pay heed to these complaints. Like quite often city councils need the council chamber to fill with a bunch of angry citizens before anything mobilizes. So there might be a long or a prolonged discontent that's not really recognized or dealt with properly. In this particular case, I think I already said, but about that the frontage here wasn't really redeveloped into a higher zoning density, and because of it being on a busier road, then it's less attractive for redevelopment because of the noise issues coming from the busy road, which is on a hill, so there is more engine noise. And so this property has less economics to be redeveloped.
We're in Vancouver, British Columbia, talking with Gordon Price, who's director of the City Program at Simon Fraser University. What is the City Program?
Mid-career professionals. You want to know about urban design, sustainability? Come to us. But, you've got a degree. You want to know what's happening out there. We bring the people who do it into the classroom.
What can you learn about urban design in cities from what Vancouver's done over the last few decades?
Oh, what a good idea it isn't to build freeways into your downtown core. That's the most important thing we never did. And I start with that because, well, literally we couldn't be here if we had, and most of what you see wouldn't exist. It would be a very different kind of place. Now, we were told at the time we had to do it, and we had plans, obviously. And to me, it's one of those great unanswered questions. How can one of the world's most livable city, economically prosperous, pretty good place on the whole, how did we survive by not building freeways? And yet we did. So much of our walkability, our bikeability, almost every aspect of our life was dependent upon that critical decision, what we didn't do in the late 60s. So I think the first thing you can learn is you don't have to build that stuff. In fact, you can probably remove good chunks of it, as some cities are, and live happily ever after, or at least you won't suffer. I think we probably are at the end of that age, or at least you can see there's all kinds of indicators that show we probably are going to see diminished use of the car. And it won't be because we force people out of their cars, God forbid, or even that they necessarily won't be able to afford them, although I think that's a part of it. So we're going to do ever so much better in making our cities work by giving them choices.
So what sort of choices has Vancouver provided its citizens by to make up for not building gigantic freeways right through the heart of the city?
You got to give them five practical choices. And let's put the car right on top. Let's make it number one. Most people it is. That's fine. It's a choice. In fact, even if I had the opportunity, I wouldn't get rid of the car. I think it does some things really, really well. And so, in fact, I make taxis and car sharing the second practical alternative, to be able to have access to a car trip without actually having to own a car. And for many people, particularly the second car, is such an economic burden. It's both liberating and makes a whole set of other economic opportunities available to them. So that's number two. Then third, all kinds of transit. We're right next to the waterfront station, and I've counted about 12 different modes, most of them transit. So from C-Bus, which we will see coming in here, to a commuter rail right below us, to SkyTrain, our local rapid transit or metro system, to buses and trolleys. You give people as many transit options, again, that they can mix and match according to the kind of trip. Then bicycle or scooter or whatever is going to emerge from the electrification of self-propelled wheels to give assist. That's a big factor. And then finally, and I think we would argue, maybe most importantly, the one that joins them all up is feet. Most of these modes are just extensions of the pedestrian trip anyway. They get you from one walking opportunity to another. But the thing is having all those choices and that they be practical and that they be integrated. So I can decide what mode I want to take according to the kind of trip I'm making, the circumstance. Is it raining? What I'm carrying, what I'm dressing, who I'm with, where I'm going, how far, what time. And making those choices seamlessly. Well, if you do that, it solves most of the problems. You don't have to do a lot of top-down planning. People will figure it out. If there's an impediment in one mode, then they can transfer to another. And they can do it with astonishing versatility. I think there's a whole generation, in fact, that's emerging who are integrating now, maybe the sixth form technology. Pulling out my tablet or my phone and finding out when the next train is coming, how it joins up, and I push another button, it'll tell me how far it takes to cycle. And having cycle sharing, along with car sharing. All of these things, terrific. More choices, the better. But they do have to be seamless, and they do have to be affordable, and they do have to be integrated. Once you do that, and I think that's where Vancouver's a practical example of it. In my life, where I live and where I work and how I get around, I've got all of those 5 choices. And I got a pretty good sense. I've got interior mental maps of how to use them all.
You have all these transportation choices. How does that fit in with how you build your buildings, where you build your buildings, the places you're trying to get to or from?
Yeah. Well, you won't be surprised to hear me say that it has to seamlessly integrate. So there has to be good, let's take bike racks, bike room, shower, change, which can be used for all kinds of other purposes too. In fact, there is a gym just around the corner here in this building, which they had to put in, partly to be competitive. That's another factor. Sidewalks. Sidewalks with curb cuts. Let's give the disabled community credit for this, I think. They were the ones who back in the 70s were pushing for this. Well, it's facilitated what a transportation consultant in Victoria, Todd Lippman, calls the most significant advance in urban transportation in the last decade. Wheels on luggage. Why is that important? Because your decision makers, your lawyers, your executives heading for the first class lounges, now with their carry-on luggage, will carry it behind them onto transit from their office through these curb cuts, constructing their mental maps, figuring out how they can do it with a greater sense now of that they will get there on time, because Canada Line only takes them 23 minutes and the walk to the lounge is only 5 minutes, and from there they can work it all out But then they become advocates for that system. They really, really like it. And when they start talking amongst it to the guys at the top of this building, and let's face it, they frequently are guys, but they can be of both genders, well, that has a big effect on how decision makers begin to allocate resources. They really like trains, there's no doubt about that. They will spend hundreds of millions of dollars more for trains than a bus system that would do equally as well for a fraction of the cost. I get that. But it's because they had wheels on luggage that made it practical for them to begin to utilize that system. Now, I was on council for 15 years, and I can tell you, I voted for my convenience. I voted for the kind of city I wanted to live in. I presume that's what my job was. And because I cycle, I voted for a lot more cycle lanes. And now because I walk, I wanted a safe and practical experience. So you get more people doing that, the more likely you are to get the city that works for a whole bunch of other people too.
Vancouver had the good fortune of not putting the freeways in the first place. We have a couple of cases where freeways have come out, and in Portland or San Francisco, little bits of them. But what do we know about how to extract a freeway from a city once it's in there?
Not a lot, because we haven't really done it, and indeed can't. To give credit to the freeway builders, it was the world's greatest public works project, but the speed with which they crossed a continent many times over, border to border, 44,000 miles of this. I mean, you can go, from Tijuana to Vancouver, 70th and Oak to be specific, there's a signal there, without ever going through a stoplight, 60 miles an hour, safely. Give them credit for that too. You can take a left-hand turn at 60 miles an hour. I mean, it's an amazing system, but try and take a piece out of it out, well, there's laws against that, I'm quite sure. Or they'll cut off your funding. Oh, they have a huge incentive to maintain that system intact. So to be rather gloomy about it, I think only when they run out of money to maintain the sucker, or when we don't have the money to fuel 2,000 pounds of metal moving at 60 miles an hour for everybody all the time for everything, will you begin to see the system rethought. And frankly, you can do amazing things with rights-of-way. You could run a really good transit system for moving people fairly long distances at high speed on that system as well. If we did it better, more people would use it. It would take less pressure, less congestion. You could increase the efficiency quite dramatically. And I think that's where the future is, at least for the foreseeable one, unless you have a very, very dark scenario, which could be quite unpleasant indeed. But I do think they're going to run into huge problems maintaining it. You think of the tens of thousands of bridges on that system alone, plus the fact of having to repave it. Oil, again, it all kind of goes back to oil. And even if we find another substitute, the idea of moving a single individual in 2,000 pounds of metal at 60 miles an hour, I don't care what the mode of energy is, you're going to run into a wall real fast. So that's the interesting strategic moment that I think we're in. The vulnerability of the system is so great that most decision makers, I think, are pretty much in denial about it. You throw in climate change, you add another level of denial. Suggests to me that when change comes, it's probably going to come pretty fast, pretty brutally. So for the kind of teaching or thinking that we're in the business of, how are you going to be able to create transportation choices for people when you've created a system which is really dependent on a very, very narrow range of options? And I don't think you're going to start by removing large chunks of it. I think you're going to have to learn how to do a lot more interesting things with it.
Vancouver is frequently mentioned as, very walkable city. What does it have to do to sort of be the best at walkability? What can be added to what's already here?
Well, I think wayfinding is so essential, reinforcing that mental maps. But other than making it, quote, look prettier or safer, it pretty much is what it is. It's a grid of streets that were laid out in probably the 1880s, and it's worked really well for us. This ain't broken. Now, curb cuts or, again, better signage, In some cases, reallocation of road space. So when you begin to reach peak pedestrian, you give a little breathing room. What you do on the sidewalk, more uses. Of course, food carts and outdoor cafe, making the system work better for more uses. It always keeps coming back to that. It's just not pedestrians. It's almost everything you can think of. What can you do better with what you've already got? Rather than assuming that you're going to be able to expand a single-use system, right, without really layering in all of the other opportunities for movement. I'm not a big fan of single-use systems. They're very vulnerable. And adding flexibility and choice, again, begins to solve a lot of problems so you don't have to spend a lot of money. Big fan of that, too. So I think that's what you're going to see. I'm a little hesitant to give any prescription because I know I'm going to miss something. There are just things. Well, I remember when we were designing the seawall, we didn't take into account people on wheels, bikes. It was in the 70s, right? So the bike had really diminished in popularity. Designers, when we were doing the seawall, you can see it on the south shore of False Creek, everything was designed for the pedestrian. They thought they were doing a great job. When we did have bicycles, we didn't think about rollerblades and what the impact of that would be. Well, that's diminished. Now we haven't thought about electrical assist. I can see that coming. I was just in Shanghai in May, so there was the future. I don't know, 50 to 60% of, quote, bicycles were all electrical assist. So that's going to be a big issue. A lot of conflict there I can see. But nonetheless, we're going to have to accommodate it. And we'll just have to come up with responses and ideas appropriate to that situation. Make mistakes, redo things, relearn, adapt, change, add choice.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.